collected some of the poop and dead body water to use for the next day before finding her own source. Don't forget, this is between you and me. I'm only telling you because you sell in school. Otherwise, I wouldn't have shared it with you. I don't want anyone to compete with me. Stephanie bought the food and took it back to her class. She got to her class and started eating. Wow, this food is so delicious, she exclaimed. Hearing this, her classmates then started stretching out their hands, begging her to share some with them. She shared a bit, and immediately they loved it. This is so delicious, they said, rushing out of the classroom to buy more. Soon, the whole class came to buy Mama Ejiro's food. Royal Grace Girls High School is a big school. It was a boarding school with girls only. There was a woman named Mama Ejiro. She had a nickname given by the students, Mama Put. Everyone knew her by that name. Mama Ejiro was the only one allowed to sell food inside the school. Every day, she would sit under the mango tree, arranging hot pots of rice, beans, soup, and fried plantains she had prepared from home to sell in the school. But most students never buy her food. They prefer their snacks, crunchy biscuits, sugary sweets, which they bought from the school top shop. Mama Ejiro wondered why students never buy her food. It was like every other regular roadside food. Mama Ejiro sat quietly every day, waiting patiently under the mango tree. Her eyes watched as the students passed, going to the school shop. Only a few students ever stopped by, and when they did, it was only out of hunger too strong to ignore. They would buy very little and wait for the school dinner bell to ring. Mama Ejiro secretly warmed the remaining lots of food to sell the next day. The students did not still buy it. She would have to throw it away as it starts to spoil. Mama Ejiro was becoming desperate. Every day, she watched the students pass by her food without a second glance. She needed to find a way to make them stop, to make them buy her food. The idea kept her up at night, and one day, she decided to seek help. One cool evening by 6 p.m., Mama Ejiro walked down her street to visit a popular food seller, known by everyone for her delicious meals. People always crowded around this woman's stall, eagerly eating and chatting. Her food was in such high demand that it was never enough. People would sit and wait just to have a taste. When Mama Ejiro reached the stall, she greeted the food seller and explained her problem. The students at the school do not buy my food, she said, her voice filled with worry. They pass by every day and go for snacks instead. How do you make your food so that everyone wants to eat it? Mama Uka listened to Mama Ejiro. At first, she looked normal, but then her face became serious. She leaned in close and looked around to see if anyone was watching. Then she spoke softly in Mama Ejiro's ear. This is not something we can talk about here, Mama Uka whispered. Come to my house tonight at 10 p.m. We will talk then. Mama Ejiro nodded. She felt nervous and curious. What secret was so important that it had to be discussed in private? As she walked back to the home, her mind was full of questions. She would have to wait until night to know the truth. When Mama Ejiro got home, she could not rest. Her mind was filled with thoughts about what Mama Uka wanted to tell her. She kept wondering. She found herself checking the clock again and again. At 9:50 p.m., Mama Ejiro got ready and left for Mama Yuka's house. She hoped to reach there by 10 p.m. When she arrived, Mama Uka looked at her seriously and asked, "Are you ready for this?" Mama Ejiro, feeling curious and nervous, replied, "I want the students to start rushing my food." "If I tell you the secret, you must not tell anyone," Mama Uka whispered. "Are you sure you are ready?" "I am ready to do whatever it takes so that those students will stop buying my food," Mama Ejiro said firmly. Mama Uka led her to the backyard. There was a small kitchen there. The place smelled bad, like rotten things. There were dirty pots that contained poops and big drums of water. The smell made Mama Ejiro want to throw up. "This is my kitchen," Mama Uka said. "What?" Mama Ejiro exclaimed, covering her mouth and nose. "I thought your kitchen was the one at the front, near your stall." "That is the kitchen I let people see," Mama Uka replied. "So, what do you do here?" Mama Ejiro asked, feeling uneasy. "This is where I get all my secret ingredients for my food," Mama Uka said with a strange smile. "Your secret ingredients? How?" "I don't understand," Mama Ejiro said. Mama Uka continued, "You see those drums containing water? That is dead body water. I get it from the cemetery. And you see those pots of poop? Those are my major ingredients. Anytime I need to poop, I just do it there. There are preservatives inside, so it doesn't spoil. When I cook, I use the dead body water mixed with some spoons of poop, make some incantations as directed by the native doctor, and that's it. Food is ready," she said with a slight smile. Mama Ejiro stood in a state of shock. Could she really do this to boost her own business? She thought hard. After much thinking, she agreed to start. First, she collected some of the poop and dead body water to use for the next day before finding her own source. Don't forget, this is between you and me. I'm only telling you because you sell in school. Otherwise, I wouldn't have shared it with you. I don't want anyone to compete with me. Mama Uka told Ejiro the incantations. She thanked Mama Uka and left to pick the beans she would prepare to sell in school the next day. The following morning, Mama Ejiro followed Mama Yuka's directions carefully. She added just a little bit of poop to the food so it wouldn't smell out. Then, she used the dead body water from the cemetery to cook and made the required incantations. When she finished, she packed the food and carried it to the school. Mama Ejiro sat under the mango tree, waiting for break time. When the bell rang, signaling break, she waited anxiously. 5 minutes passed, and only one student came, a little JSS2 girl named Stephanie. Stephanie bought the food and took it back to her class. She got to her class and started eating. Wow! This food is so delicious, she exclaimed. Hearing this, her classmates then started stretching out their hands, begging her to share some with them. She shared a bit, and immediately they loved it. This is so delicious, they said, rushing out of the classroom to buy more. Soon, the whole class came to buy Mama Ejiro's food. Word spread quickly, and before long, everyone, even the teachers, wanted to eat her meal. 1 week later, more and more girls started visiting the school clinic. Students were getting sick. They would vomit and complain of stomach pains. Nobody suspected Mama Ejiro because she had been selling in the school for a long time. Parents became worried as their children often called home, saying they were sick. They blamed the school, saying it did not provide clean water for the students. Stephanie, the JSS2 girl who first bought Mama Ejiro's food, became so sick that she had to leave the school and get admitted to a hospital for treatment. The principal shouted at every worker in the school, ordering them to make sure they provided clean food and water for the students. Mama Ejiro soon realized she could not get enough poop on her own to cook all her meals. She had a new idea. There was an incomplete building where some students went to poop in secret. It was illegal to poop in the building, but the students wouldn't listen. They called it shot put, which means to illegal go and poop in a place that is not allowed. In the quiet evenings, Mama Ejiro would go there and carefully pack the poop into a cooler. Every day, more students went to the school clinic. They held their stomachs, crying in pain. Some vomited and others just lay on the clinic beds looking weak. The number of sick students kept growing, but Mama Ejiro didn't care. She was making so much money, her mind was only on her business. Why is my child always complaining of stomach pain? One parent asked. What kind of food are you giving them? Another yelled. Mrs. Johnson decided to act. She called the school cooks to her office. They stood before her, shaking and looking afraid. Her face was red with anger as she shouted, "What are you people putting in the food? Do you want to destroy the school? Parents are blaming us for their children falling sick." The cooks began to beg. One of them, a woman named Anita, spoke with tears in her eyes. "Ma, please, don't fire us. I have 2 children I'm taking care of on my own. I'm a single mother. This is my only job. This is where I feed my family and pay their bills," she said, sobbing. Another cook added, "We didn't do anything wrong, Ma. We only cook what the school gives us." But Mrs. Johnson wasn't listening. She waved her hand and shouted, "Enough! You are all fired. Pack your things and leave the school today." Anita kept pleading, "Ma, please, think of my children." But Mrs. Johnson didn't care. She had already made up her mind. After firing the cooks, Mrs. Johnson gave a strict order. From now on, no student is allowed to call their parents about any problem. If we have a problem, we will settle it here in the school. Any teacher, staff, or guardian who lets a student call home will be punished. Do you understand? Everyone nodded in approval. Mama Ejiro, sitting under her mango tree, smiled quietly to herself. Her food was making her richer every day, and nobody even suspected her. New cooks were employed the next day to replace the ones who were fired. That morning, Mama Ejiro's daughter, Victoria, came to visit her at school. Victoria was a 200-level student in the university and had not seen her mother in a while. When Victoria arrived, she was surprised to see many students lining up under the mango tree, waiting to buy her mother's food. "Mama, look at all these people. You're doing so well," Victoria said, smiling brightly. She felt proud of her mother. Mama Ejiro smiled back nervously. Just then, Victoria picked up one of the plates and served herself some food. As she raised the spoon to her mouth, Mama Ejiro quickly pushed her hand, making the food fall to the ground. "Oh, Mama, why did you do that?" Victoria asked, confused. "I'm sorry," Mama Ejiro said quickly. "It slipped. Please forgive me. No problem, Mama, Victoria replied. She reached for another plate to serve herself again, but before she could eat, her mother leaned close to her and whispered in their language, "Don't eat this food." Victoria froze for a moment. She wanted to question her mother, but when Mama Ejiro gave her a sharp look, she immediately understood that she shouldn't say anything. Quietly, she put the plate down and stepped aside. Mama Ejiro returned to selling her food, smiling at the students standing in line as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, at the back of the line, two SS2 students, Christabel and Favour, noticed the way Mama Ejiro had stopped her daughter from eating the food. They exchanged puzzled glances. "Did you see that?" Christabel whispered to Favour. "Why wouldn't she let her own daughter eat the food?" "It's strange," Favour replied. "Do you think something is wrong with the food?" The two girls moved to a quiet corner and began to discuss what they had seen. "I think we need to find out what's going on," Favour said firmly. Christabel nodded. "We should. Don't forget, one of our friends is still in the hospital. What if this has something to do with it?" The girls agreed to find out the secret behind Mama Ejiro's food. They left without buying again. Instead, they bought snacks. It was finally time for Mama Ejiro to pack up and go home. She tied her bowls in a sack and prepared to leave the school premises. Christabel and Favour, who had been watching her, were ready to carry out their plan to expose her secret. "Let's follow her and see where she goes," Christabel whispered to Favour as they hid behind a wall, keeping a close eye on Mama Ejiro. Quietly, they followed her from a safe distance. Mama Ejiro didn't seem to notice them as she made her way toward the incomplete building. The girls peeked from behind a corner and watched as Mama Ejiro entered the building. Christabel and Favour gasped when they saw her scoop poop from the ground into the cooler. "What is she doing?" Favour whispered, her face filled with disgust. "I don't know," Christabel replied, her voice shaky. "But whatever it is, we have to find out." Mama Ejiro calmly covered the cooler, looked around to make sure no one was watching, and started walking toward the school gate. Christabel and Favour exchanged worried looks and followed her, trying to stay out of sight. When Mama Ejiro reached the school gate, she stepped outside. The girls stopped in their tracks. "We can't go past the gate," Favour said, frowning. "The security won't let us out." "What do we do now?" Christabel asked, frustrated. They stood there, unsure of how to continue following Mama Ejiro without getting caught. "How about we follow the fence?" Christabel suggested, her eyes determined. Favour's face showed immediate shock. "What if they catch us?" she asked nervously. "You know the consequences. I don't want to give my mum a heart attack. She's the only one I have." Christabel tried to convince her. "For the sake of our friend who has been suffering in the hospital for the past 3 weeks, let's just do this," she said firmly. "We'll be very careful. Nobody will see us." Favour hesitated, her mind racing with thoughts of what could happen if they were caught. But Christabel's determination made her reconsider. "All right," she finally said with a sigh, "but you better not get us into trouble." "Trust me," Christabel replied with a small smile. The two girls made their way to the back of their hostel where the fence stood. They changed their clothes so that they won't be easily noticed. It was a little high, but they weren't about to give up. They stood each other. Together, they managed to get over the fence without making too much noise. Once on the other side, they crouched low, ready to continue. Mama Ejiro had already gone far. Christabel and Favour hurried to close the distance, carefully staying hidden as they followed her. Mama Ejiro went straight to her kitchen, carrying the cooler of poop. She dropped it near the back door before heading inside her house. "Let's go back to school now," Favour whispered, looking uneasy. "No," Christabel said firmly. "We have to stay until tomorrow." "What?" Favour gasped. "Where are we going to sleep? Are you not afraid?" Christabel took a deep breath. "We need to do this for our friend's sake," Christabel continued. "My parents always call me useless. They say I've never been recognized for anything good in school. This is my chance to prove them wrong." Favour's face softened. "I'm sorry, Christabel," she said. "But is that really why we should risk our lives? What if something bad happens to us?" "Nothing bad will happen," Christabel replied confidently. "We'll be fine." "Where will we sleep then?" Favour asked, looking around nervously. It was late, and the night had grown darker. They found a spot at a nearby store and decided to rest there until very early morning. They will see the way Mama Ejiro prepares her food. Meanwhile, back in the school, the hostel mistress came to do the nightly bed check. She walked from hostel to hostel, ensuring that all students were present. When she reached Christabel and Favour's hostel, she noticed their empty beds. "Where are Christabel and Favour?" she asked the other girls in the hostel. The girls looked at each other, confused. "We don't know, Ma," they said, shaking their heads. After searching for some time, the hostel mistress frowned and wrote their names down on the blacklist. She suspected they had jumped the school fence and left the premises without permission. She planned to submit their names to the school authority in the morning. The girls would face serious punishment and their parents would be charged accordingly when they returned. Early in the morning, Christabel and Favour. They sat up quietly and saw Mama Ejiro come out of her house. The air was cold. They quickly hid behind a corner. They peeked out carefully, trying not to make a sound. Mama Ejiro walked straight to the cooler. She carried a small metal bowl in her hand. She opened the cooler, and a terrible smell came out. Christabel and Favour covered their noses, trying not to cough. "What is she doing?" Favour whispered. Christabel didn't answer. She took out the phone she had sneaked into school and started recording. Mama Ejiro scooped some poop from the cooler into her bowl. She looked at it for a moment, then walked to a big drum of water nearby. She fetched some water with a container and poured it into the bowl. She mixed the poop and dead body water together slowly. Favour's eyes widened. "She's using that for cooking," she whispered. Christabel still didn't say anything. She was focused on recording everything. Mama Ejiro carried the bowl to her cooking area. There were pots and firewood arranged there. She placed the bowl on the ground and began lighting the fire. Christabel zoomed in on her phone to make sure she captured every detail: the cooler, the drum, the bowl, and Mama Ejiro mixing everything. She held her breath, scared that any noise might make Mama Ejiro notice them. Favour and Christabel sneaked back into the school early in the morning after getting enough evidence. They moved carefully, trying not to be seen. When they got to their hostel, they were tired and wanted to clean up, but there was no time. The hostel mistress was already shouting, chasing students to the morning assembly. "Get up! Everyone, move to the assembly now," she yelled. Favour and Christabel quickly put on their uniforms without taking a bath. They grabbed their things and joined the line of students heading to the assembly ground, pretending like nothing had happened. As they hurried to the assembly, Favour whispered to Christabel, "How will you show the evidence?" "If you bring out your phone, they will seize it." Christabel frowned. "That's true, oh. I can't let them seize my 13 Pro Max, oh," she replied, clutching her pocket where the phone was hidden. "We'll find another way. For now, let's just go to the assembly." They joined the line of students already standing on the assembly ground. The principal, Mrs. Johnson, stepped forward, her sharp eyes scanning the crowd. She began with the usual announcements, talking about upcoming school events and warning students to obey the rules. Favour and Christabel stood quietly in the middle of the crowd, trying to blend in. Everything seemed fine until Mrs. Johnson picked up a piece of paper. She cleared her throat, and the air around the assembly became tense. "Now, I have a list of students who broke the school rules last night," Mrs. Johnson said sternly. Favour and Christabel exchanged worried glances. They tried to look calm, but their hearts were racing. Mrs. Johnson's voice rang out across the assembly ground. While others were sleeping, these students jumped out of the school. She paused for effect. "When they come back with sickness now, they will stop blaming the school." The next words froze them in place. Favour gasped and grabbed Christabel's arm. "Oh my God! What will I tell my mom?" she whispered, tears filling her eyes. Christabel was burning with fear inside her, but she forced herself to stay calm. The two girls stepped out of the line and walked to the front. The entire assembly was silent, with hundreds of eyes watching them. Favour's hands were shaking, while Christabel stared straight ahead, refusing to look at anyone. Mrs. Johnson stood tall, holding her long cane. She looked at the girls with disappointment. "You think you can break the rules and go free," she said, her voice sharp. "This school has rules for a reason. Before I give you the bills for bags of cement and barbed wires to give your parents, you will have to cry." Christabel was trying to stay brave. Favour's tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered, "I'm finished. What will I tell my mom?" Passed by in the distance. It was Mama Ejiro, pushing her wheelbarrow filled with food to her usual spot under the mango tree. She seemed completely unaware of the drama unfolding on the assembly ground, humming softly as she walked. Favour stood trembling at the front of the assembly, tears streaming down her face. She could barely speak as the principal, Mrs. Johnson, raised her cane. "Please, Ma, I didn't mean to," Favour stammered, her voice shaking. Christabel clenched her fists. She didn't want to bring out the phone just yet. What if they seized it? What if they didn't believe her? But when she looked at Favour, crying so hard that her shoulders shook, something inside her changed. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the phone. "Ma, wait!" Christabel shouted, holding up the device. Mrs. Johnson paused, her sharp eyes narrowing at Christabel. What is that? A phone. You know phones are not allowed in the school. I know, Ma, Christabel said, her voice loud and steady. But I have proof. Proof that we didn't jump the fence just for fun. The assembly erupted in murmurs. Students whispered to one another, wondering what was happening. Christabel unlocked the phone with shaky hands and stepped forward. She showed the video to Mrs. Johnson, who watched in silence. The principal's eyes widened as she saw Mama Ejiro scooping poop and mixing it with water. The camera captured every detail, her movements, her secret kitchen, and the horrifying preparation of her food. Mrs. Johnson was in shock, and her hands tightened around the cane. What is this? She whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. It's the truth, Ma, Christabel said firmly. That's what Mama Ejiro uses to cook her food. Before Mrs. Johnson could respond, a commotion broke out. Mama Ejiro, who had been standing nearby, saw the crowd turning toward her. She panicked and began sneaking away, pushing her wheelbarrow toward the gate. Stop her! Mrs. Johnson shouted. The school security guards sprang into action. The guards caught her before she reached the gate. Mama Ejiro was dragged back to the assembly ground, her head hanging low. The students watched in stunned silence as Mrs. Johnson confronted her. Take us to your kitchen, she demanded. Reluctantly, Mama Ejiro led them to the small, hidden kitchen behind her stall. The smell of rotting substances filled the air as the staff and security stepped inside. They saw the cooler of poop, the drum of dead body water from the cemetery, and the dirty pots. Gasps of shock and disgust filled the air. How could you do this? One teacher exclaimed, covering her nose. This is what the students have been eating, another staff member asked, horrified. They all returned back to the school. Mama Ejiro was arrested. She didn't say a word, her eyes fixed on the ground. Mrs. Johnson turned to Christabel and Favour. You have done something brave today, she said. You saved the school from a terrible sickness. Favour wiped her tears, finally smiling. Christabel stood tall, her heart swelling with pride. Mrs. Johnson continued, but this doesn't mean you can jump the fence again. And no phones are allowed in the school. Is that clear? Yes, Ma, they both replied, bowing their heads. The principal smiled slightly. As a reward, I will not punish you. Instead, you will each get a gift. She handed them envelopes. Inside, there was money and a handwritten note thanking them for their courage. The news spread around the school. It was posted on the School Parents Teacher Association group PDA. When Christabel got home, her parents couldn't stop praising her. You've made us so proud, her mother said, hugging her tightly. You've shown us you're not useless at all. Christabel felt happier than ever. She finally felt seen and valued. From that day until they graduated, teachers and students praised Christabel and Favour. They became heroes in the school. Meanwhile, Mama Ejiro sat quietly in a police cell as she faced her sentence. She didn't reveal anything about Mama Uka. Back on the streets, Mama Uka continued selling her dirty food, unnoticed by anyone. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.
Much for staying tuned till now. If you have watched up to this moment, I want to say a very big thank you to all who have pressed the subscribe button. Please do well to also press on the notification bell so you are aware when next I will be posting my next story. And until next time, bye-bye.